In a fine dining restaurant in Manhattan tonight, a single lobster can cost more than a 19th century laborer earned in 2 weeks. The same animal. In 1840s Massachusetts, fed to indentured servants, used as cod bait, ground up for the cheapest institutional kitchens on the coast. The animal didn't change. What changed was who could pay for it. Infrastructure, scarcity, audience. The era when lobster was abundant and worthless. The infrastructure that turned the same animal into something else. The events that locked the new meaning in place. It's not a story about lobsters. It's a story about systems. In 1623, a ship reached Plymouth carrying old friends from England, visiting the colony. The settlers wanted to host them well. The best meal William Bradford, the governor, could offer was a lobster, a piece of fish, and a cup of fair spring water. He apologized for it. He saw it as a failure of hospitality. He wrote about the moment years later in the chronicle that became Of Plymouth Plantation. By the 1630s, English colonists were writing back from New England that lobsters washed up on Massachusetts beaches in piles, by some accounts 2 feet high after storms. Cod bait, pig feed, garden manure when there was a surplus, cheap food for indentured servants and for the institutional kitchens on the coast. Anything you could do with a protein nobody wanted. In the same decade, in the same colony, a man named William Wood published a book on New England for English readers, a kind of survival guide for prospective settlers. On lobster, the line that gets quoted 400 years later is 8 words. Their plenty makes them little esteemed and seldom eaten. Wood wrote more than that, but that's the line that survived, because that's the line that captured the attitude. That attitude held for 2 centuries. Then somebody figured out how to put it in a can. In 1842, in Eastport, Maine, U.S. Treat opened the first lobster cannery in the country. By 1880, Maine had 23 canneries running, employing around 800 workers between them, packing close to 2 million 1-pound cans a year. 2/3 of the entire Maine catch was going into cans. Half of the cans were exported overseas. A 1-pound can, meat from about 3.5 pounds of live lobster, sold for 5 cents. It was the cheap protein of choice for working-class urban kitchens. Nothing special. By the late 1880s, the canning industry was already collapsing. The big lobsters were gone, and in the same decade, fresh lobster started showing up on the menus of expensive Boston hotels, at prices the cannery workers would have laughed at. Same animal, same coast, same year. The can was survival. The plate, status. The mechanism was geography. It was the railroad. In 1884, the Maine shoreline connected Bangor to Mount Desert Ferry on the coast. From the terminal, a steamer carried passengers across Frenchman Bay to Bar Harbor, the resort that, by 1881, already had 30 hotels on the island competing for summer visitors. By 1887, Boston and Maine ran a seasonal limited from Boston straight up to the ferry. By the 1890s, the wealthiest summer residents, Rockefellers, Morgans, Vanderbilts, Astors, were building cottages on the cliffs. Their guests came in on the trains. A man arrives in Bar Harbor in the summer of 1893. He's traveled by rail from Chicago. 3 days, 4 trains, a steamer across the bay. He's never seen a fresh lobster. At most, he's seen a 5-cent tin on a grocery shelf in Illinois, full of pale, shredded meat that didn't taste like much. The hotel dining room offers him a whole one, boiled that afternoon, steam coming off the shell. He has no inland reference for what this animal means in a Massachusetts cannery town. He's not paying for lobster. He's paying for something he has no reference for. So the price is whatever the dining room says it is. The same trains that brought tourists east could carry product back west. Live tank shipping, what New England fishermen called smacks, kept lobsters alive in seawater wells on deck. Ice-packed rail cars handled the rest. By the 1890s, fresh lobster could reach New York and Chicago dining rooms still moving. And the inland customers, millions of them, had no reference for it. The canned gray meat was a different product. In taste, in texture, in what it meant culturally. Two parallel markets. Same animal, different prices. Indexed not to the lobster, but to who was eating it and where. The railroad was the spark. It didn't act alone. Inland cities had been growing for decades. Restaurants were already competing for exclusivity. None of that was new in the 1880s. The train was. So if the animal didn't change, what did? Lobster didn't become expensive. It became expensive to the right people, and invisible to everyone else. The price wasn't really about the lobster. It was about who was eating it, how it got to them, and what they thought it was. The animal almost didn't matter. And this isn't a story about lobster. It's a story about how the food economy decides what something is worth. The same mechanism that's running right now on bluefin tuna, on truffles, on caviar. Most of them have a lobster in their past. Now the third force, scarcity. Maine's lobster waters had been hammered for 2 decades. The canneries took everything. Small, large, females with eggs, all of it, to keep the supply chain fed. By the early 1870s, the catch was visibly collapsing. So in 1872, Maine passed its first conservation law, a ban on harvesting egg-bearing females. 2 years later, in 1874, came the first minimum size, 10.5 inches. These were among the first conservation laws of their kind in the region. Not for cod, not for salmon, both also in decline. For the lobster, the species with the new high-end market. The supply got regulated just as urban demand was rising. Scarcity stopped being a problem and became a feature. By the mid-1890s, the lobster canning industry was gone, starved of the small lobsters it ran on, finished off by tighter and tighter size laws. The cheap protein market was over. The lobster that survived was the lobster the dining rooms wanted. Large, intact, alive on arrival. From there, the market reinforced itself. By the early 20th century, lobster's identity as an urban dining specialty was largely set. By the time the United States entered the Second World War, lobster was already a luxury. Which is why the war reinforced its status instead of creating it. Here's how. The Office of Price Administration rationed sugar, coffee, meat, fats, cheese, canned fish. The full list ran to dozens of items. Fresh seafood, including lobster, wasn't on it, largely because the supply was too localized to manage. The OPA's reasoning was logistical, not snobbish. But the cultural effect was the same. While middle-class Americans traded ration stamps for beef, the people who could afford it were eating lobster freely. By 1945, the association of lobster with celebration and wealth was permanent. After the war, the lock held. Air freight, refrigerated trucking, the Maine Lobstermen's Association cooperative model. Today, Maine alone accounts for roughly 3/4 of U.S. lobster production. American per capita lobster consumption is higher now than at any point in the supposedly low-status colonial era, when the shells in your yard were a sign of poverty. The can was survival. The plate, status. What sat in between was a railroad, then a regulation, then a war. That's not a lobster story. That's a story about infrastructure, scarcity, and audience. About who gets to eat what, and what they think it means when they do. It's the only kind of story this channel is going to tell. The animal is incidental. The system is the point.